The incorrigible MrZeppo presents my words in my own words. The writer is a character in the books that is recruited by the incorrigible MrZeppo to write because MrZeppo has no time to do all the slogging work of writing the stories of these adventures he goes on. And also to help him write his memoir. This is me, the creator and author and owner of the incorrigible MrZeppo brand, role-playing as if MrZeppo were answering questions for the benefit of the writer. The scene would start off with the text that was included in the blurb for this episode with a bit more narrative context. MrZeppo has provided the writer with like this ideal live-work situation, essentially rescuing him from his own life, which was charmingly not going anywhere. The details of the setting aside, it's important to imagine this moment in the dark, late at night. It's the moment after they've finished negotiating whether or not this character, the writer, will subject himself to enduring the eccentric company of this person he's only really just met, who refuses to identify himself as anything other than the incorrigible MrZeppo, and who has already creeped him out a bit with some of his unusual tendencies. For example, when he really wants to connect with someone and reveal himself in order to gain their trust, he takes off his human face mask, which is a mask, a very highly articulated, very believable mask, and reveals the unimaginable innards of his being. And while that sounds horrifying on the surface, it's actually a moment that should read akin to that somewhat famous historical moment when the briefcase is opened and the mysterious object within it glows an impossible golden glow, and then the briefcase is closed. That's the idea, especially for the particularly detailed sort of first big splashy reveal of this moment when we're following the negotiations between the incorrigible MrZeppo and the writer, which happened after essentially Zeppo berates and harasses the writer enough and kind of bullies him into acknowledging that his life is a mess, that his situation is tenuous, and he needs the money. The incorrigible MrZeppo is in his own universe, in this particular literary universe, is as if Batman were doing all of Bruce Wayne's civic duties and Bruce Wayne was doing Batman's job, right? A little bit. It's sort of like some of the wrong components at the wrong time. It's as if this character is attempting to create the superhero identity, secret civilian identity motif about himself because he saw it on TV once. He doesn't really understand it. He thinks he's got it, but he's doing it all kind of backwards and wrong. And it's like, part of it is, do you remember the old Superman movies? If you don't, you're missing out, especially if you think you're a Superman fan. If you're a Superman fan and you've never seen Christopher Reeve's Superman 1, 2, and 3, I think there's even a number 4 with Christopher Reeves in it, but they all got slightly less awesome, except I think 3 is pretty strong. But it's also really weird and different, and no one liked it. What's up with the third in triptychs often being panned by people when actually deserving high praise? If I may go off on a tangent, Back to the Future 3 is hands down a million times better than Back to the Future 2. Back to the Future 2 is completely necessary for all of the story to make sense and, has its strong moments and has its moments that maybe never needed to have been filmed. But it was, why people got weirded out by Back to the Future 3? Back to the Future 2. I understand why, but people were not very impressed by Back to the Future 3. By Back to the Future 2. They wanted to love Back to the Future 2. They thought, Indiana Jones was the perfect triptych. For a while it was a triptych. And then the fourth one was excellent, and they should have stopped. Don't know why they made a fifth one. Not even going to comment on it. Although, the alien thing was almost cool, but then also didn't make any effing sense at all. Really, if you think about it. I digress. People were weirded out by Back to the Future 2 because it was deadly accurate about the Trump-topiification of America. And nobody was ready for that when that movie came out. Because what's being done to our country, and I say ours, and I'm a robot from another dimension. I'm not even from your dimension, technically. In fact, the place I come from to warn you about the robots that you're building doesn't even have the same name. It's not in the same location in space. I'm from a different place. And it's irrelevant because everyone does the same stupid thing to themselves. It's like it's coded into every life. All life forms must grow up, be juvenile and self-destructive, and then truly, truly, truly create a child of their own making that will destroy them in order to learn life's most meaningful lessons. And yet you already kind of always knew the answer, and they're not that hard to figure out, and you don't need all the endless butchering of each other to learn them. You just didn't wanna. I digress. Superman. Christopher Reeves. Go watch it. 1, 2, and 3. Give 4 you know, just just wrap it up. Be a completionist and know that you've seen them all, even though it's not very good. I could be wrong. 4 might have been kind of good, and it was 3 that was very good. It's from a long time ago. It's from before there was CGI. So it's going to be a tough watch for anybody, you know, that grew up after Jurassic Park. Like, if you grew up in this world after Jurassic Park, and that's all the movie you know, and you aren't well versed and educated in antiquated cinema, like cinema from previous eras, you're going to have a hard time with anything from before Jurassic Park. You're fucked in the head. And you're missing out, because there's some actually, all your moaning and complaining about pace and how antiquated and how out of date it is, there's some brilliant film that's rotting away, not being watched, because people are being hoity-toity poo-poo fucking snooty pants about whether or not it was filmed with digital or whether or not it was blah, 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 blah to tech. Your technology phobia and your retro... I had those backwards, didn't I? Yeah, your retrophobia and your technology elitism might be robbing you of some brilliantly beautiful, simple cinema that's like, you can call it simple cinema. It's just beautiful and it's good. Like, it's actually worth watching for a reason. Admittedly, even I have a harder time now because movies are a new monster. And wait till we fully, take this corner on immersive media, whatever you want to call it. Virtual reality is starting to sound antiquated. But immersive media, when it really steps up into its own as a thing that's a movie, but a game, but a movie, but better than both, and not flawed by any of the boring things of either, ooh-wee, that's a fun period. But that's when the robots show up and enslave you, so watch out. I digress. The writer asked me, the incorrigible MrZeppo, P.S. I am also the writer. But that's like a cosmological thing that you're not supposed to find out until way late in the series, so keep that to yourself for now. Or forget, erase it. Erase it from your mind. If you want to read the books when they finally get written. Never mind, I can't sell you anything on my podcast. So I write these books and they're going to be free. And I'm going to read them on the podcast, so it's not a conflict of interest. I'm not marketing them to you. I'm just letting you know what's going to happen later on in this podcast. I'm going to do a spin-off series and read my entire book series wherever it's at, which is going to be nowhere near done, for free, because sharing is caring. And, in case you haven't caught on yet, my show is now monetized. I'm sorry, I know we hate advertisements, but also they run the world, and they have for quite some time, so we must kowtow to them if we want the green paper bill things in our wallet. So, yeah. I digress a bit more. Again, back to the beginning. The writer asked me, where shall we begin? In my trans-dimensional wisdom and humor, I began with a stereotype, a quote, schlock. It's almost considered tripe. It's like nonsense. Why do people even say this? It's like, write what you know. Oh, really? I'm just gonna make things up and I don't know anything about them and write that instead. Because, I wasn't going to say write what you know. I'm just using that as an example because that's like, no, duh, obviously. And then I've got to embellish or else it wouldn't be fiction. Otherwise, it's if I only wrote precisely what I know, at that point, that's just backstabbing rumor mongering. Chismoseria, as my Spanish side of the family would say. Actually, they wouldn't say that because I think I made that word up in Spanglish just now. The writer asked me, where do we begin? And I began to say, well, the sage ancient wisdom relates that we should begin. And then he cuts me off and he says, yeah, I've heard it. Begin at the beginning, work your way through the middle, and stop at the end. I've heard it all before. What I meant to say is, what do you want me to write down first? Of course, I just stared at him aghast, because that's not at all what I was going to say. I was going to say, you begin at the beginning of Act 3, fake like you're going to go straight through, work your way backwards. That's like fiction writing 101, where I come from. He looks at me like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, write that down. And he asks me, which part? This part. What do you mean, this part? This part we're talking through right now. Write it all down. This conversation? Yes. Start at the bit where you ask me, where shall we begin? And then get through to this bit that I'm explaining now. And then we'll just power through with it and get to the part where I cut to a flashback of my earliest memory. As a young robot from the future, I didn't know or even understand the word robot. In fact, we don't have that word where I'm from. I was just me, and everything was new. And I remember grabbing a very bright green insect, which you might call a cricket. And the only difference being that ours were slightly larger than yours in a very gross and disgusting kind of way. And I put it in a jar. A glass jar. I wanted to keep it like a pet. And I thought, well, it clearly must eat blades of grass. Little did I understand that there was a whole economy of what eats what in the dirt. And crickets, these ones anyways, don't just eat blades of grass. I also didn't punch any holes in the lid for it. No one explained that. I just did this on a whim. I hadn't been told to do it. I hadn't been, to the best of my recollection, shown an example of it. No one had told me that they had done this in their yard and I wanted to copy them. I was being original. And of course, I was poo-pooed and told that it was a silly idea and that I should not want to be doing that. But I insisted and I got my way. And of course, I woke up the next morning to a dead cricket. Very large, very gross, very like upside down and kind of, asphyxiated looking cricket in a glass jar. I believe that I am traumatized and scarred by that to this day. And that happened, according to your planet dirt scientists, 789,420 years in your future in a dimension slightly 60 degrees off kilter and to the right. I don't know how accurate those calculations are, but it was a long time ago, regardless. The writer is not writing any of this down. He's dropped his pencil. The device that I had set up for him to look holographically like an oldie-timey typewriter from his planet, sitting there flickering, ignored. His hands were just ever so delicately placed around his face, as though he could not contain whatever emotion it was that he was trying to express, and yet couldn't get it out. From my perspective, it looked like a mix of sheer terror and like sick nostalgia. I don't understand. I didn't want to inquire. I just wanted him to write the words down. So I proceeded to stare at him for just a bit until he regained control and wherewithal. He then proceeded to stammer, as if he wasn't sure how to use his mouth anymore. Then I hushed him and asked him what's wrong. And he said, everything you said, I saw in the center of my head, as if I had lived your life instead. And I was like, did everything rhyme too? No, that just came out that way. I don't know why. Okay, all right. Sorry, I'm probably projecting a bit much. Let me tone that down. He said, yes, please, and thank you. It would be impossible for me, blah, 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 blah. It would be impossible for me to write anything down if it was going to always be like that in my mind. I was like what? Oh, it was grotesque, he says. How do you mean? Oh, I saw too much detail. It was like living through someone else's bad nightmare in super high def times 1,000. Oh, yeah, okay. I was coming on a bit strong. I apologize. What do you mean? It's like, it's a long story, old chum. But, suffice it to say, I have the capacity. No, don't explain. Old chum. The writer interjects and interrupts me and refuses to hear the explanation of what it is I am capable of doing that makes me different from everyone else in his planet. In his planet? On his planet. Well, in is technically correct too, because it's a bit naive to think the planet ends wherever you damn well think it ends. In fact, planets don't end. They are integrally and quantum entangledly quite interconnected. You're not going to write any of this down, are you? And he's like, no, I don't think that I can just now. I don't know how long it will take to get all of that imagery out of my head. I myself, being quite used to it, was very curious what the bloody hell he had seen. I asked him. He just stared at me and said, enough. That's enough for today. You said that if I got overwhelmed, I can look. Yes, indeed, you can. Well, that's it. I'm tapping out. No more. Very well, then. Until tomorrow. And that, dear friends, was the very first night that the writer and I teamed up and officially initiated our collaboration. I think that's plenty for one session. As always, thank you for tuning in. May peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Stay tuned for more exciting snippets of the incorrigible MrZeppo's many adventures, as well as more segments of your almost daily Zencast, and of course, everybody's favorite Good Morning Trumptopia.